Yeah. So, all right. So, chapter 39 deals with JSF. Okay, it's a new technology. It's a newer than JSP. JSP's been around for almost 20 years now. But JSF, it's been around, I just say, maybe 12, 13 years. So it's still kind of new. It's a much more powerful technology because it uses the MVC uh, framework, which is uh, um, very different from the way we have done so far with JSP. So I want to review again just a little bit about the web application overview of these two types here. We have the presentation-oriented and the service-oriented. Okay, so the service will be something like a servlet, right? It does a lot of the services behind the engine or the site. It does a little bit on the the view, things like that. But so JSP and JSF, these are more of the presentation style, which is commonly for web designs. Okay, so I also want to make a note here that I mentioned this like very early in the semester that sometimes later on we had issues with Eclipse and Tomcat, and this is one of those times. So chapter 39, which deals with JSF, it depends on, I don't know, systems. I have no idea, but I usually run into issues most of the times with Eclipse and Tomcat for JSF. So if this doesn't work for you with your version of Eclipse, and then I would recommend try switching that over to Glassfish. Okay, so if Tomcat doesn't work, try Glassfish. If that still doesn't work, then move over to NetBeans. Okay, so you have all these options going on. I mean, NetBeans is just very similar to Eclipse. It's actually a much more preferred IDE for JSF because NetBeans comes with a Glassfish, which is a container that is a native to NetBeans, also native to Java, because NetBeans, Glassfish, and Java are all belonging to the same company, right, which is Oracle. Whereas you have like Eclipse, it's a different company, that's IBM. You have Tomcat is just Apache, so completely separate. And then you have JSF, which is Java. So you have three different entities coming together as one. So sometimes they don't work as smoothly. Okay, but if you have issues with Tomcat, then again use the Glassfish, and I'm using that right now. Actually I've used both of them, and I still have issues with Tomcat. So in my examples tonight, I'll be using the Glassfish here. It seems to be working smoothly so far. So if it doesn't work for you, try to switch that as well. Okay, so JSF stands for Java Server Faces. Again, don't confuse this with Java Server Pages. Okay, this is a new technology that is probably, I would say, I would not say that it's going to replace JSP, but it is becoming more popular because of the way it is designed. It follows this MVC, or the ModelViewController paradigm. This is also a very powerful framework that's becoming more and more common in many languages, such as PHP use that as well. And of course ASP.NET, if you're going to web or SharePoint, you will also be experiencing with MVC there as well. And so this is like the server-side type of technologies. You also build MVC applications using a front-side or front-end or client-side, which is JavaScript-based. Like AngularJS is an MVC. A newer design that is designed by Facebook called React.js is also an MVC design. So these are really interesting, and sooner or later you will get to use them in your career. Okay, so in JSF, it uses some new technologies or some new tags. These are the custom tag libraries that comes with JSF. And two of those common ones are the H and the F tags. Okay, we'll see what they are, but just really, the H it just means that a tag for your for the usual HTML tags, and then the F is for some custom tags that are part of the JSF framework. Okay, so if you look in here, you'll see some later in the code that in your HTML tag you have two of these lines that looks like this. This is the usual, the standard type of tags that is used for JSP, and of course you can change these to something else. This is just a variable name, really, a placeholder. You can use to reference your tag. If you remember JSP, we have the JSP tag, right? JSP colon set property or JSP colon use bean, right? The same thing here. So it just tells you that you have a different namespace. Okay, a namespace is just a different collection of tags that you can use, a different library. Okay, so in this example, you had three of them. One is without any of the tag. This is just saying it's coming directly from the w3.org site. So that means all the tags are just your normal HTML tags. Okay, that's all it is. And XML tags. The XML means it's have to be like lowercase, right? That's all. And you have to close every tag. That's the rule. And then here you have the H. It's coming from the HTML tag as well, but it's part of the JSF library. That means that Java, they kind of modify the HTML tags to make it a little bit more, I guess, convenient for you to develop, forms and tags and all those good stuff, okay, with in their own different ways. But when you render on the browser, you will get very similar output, okay? And then same thing with the F here, just another library. This is the core tags in the library. That is, you can also use that to build your forms, your website as well. And so you have different tags, and you can have your own custom tags, and you have many others as well. Okay, so here I just showed you that you can change it from H to H to just HX or F to whatever you want to call it. You just kind of be consistent in your form. But I mean, this is not recommended. I just say you can, but you probably don't want to do that. Okay, if you need help or need to see more of the information, these are the two sites you go to just for different versions of the Java and so on. Okay, so let's go down here and look just a little bit a history of the Java EE. So you do need a Java EE version. Okay, so that's why I asked you way from the beginning to install a Java EE, not a Java SE. It does not work on the standard edition. It needs to be the enterprise edition. So so if you look at this JSP, because all these deal with the EE edition. So you should have that. If you don't, you need to install it, which I think you do have already. If you're able to run, JSF and JSP and Servlet, you're okay. I just tell you that so JSP has been around, since 1999, or actually a little bit earlier than that, but this is when it was released. So as you can see, Servlet actually was released way before that. We're already here in version 2.2, but JSP started here, and then until like around 2004, 2005, around here, you have the JSF version 1 coming out. Okay, so it's about like 4 years, a couple years before that, after JSP. And so ever since then until now, we have the latest stable version. Actually, it's JSF 3 already, but it's still the 2.2 is still the or 2.2.x is still the very still being used around today, which is still very stable. So the one I'll be using is still going to be 2.2 dot something, dot 8 or dot something here. Okay, just some terminology here. JSTL just stands for Java Server Pages Standard Library, Standard Tag Library. You see a lot of new acronyms, and as we move on. So here's another table kind of show you the different technologies. You can see how they are from Servlet to JSP to JSF. So we're going from oldest to the newest technology, but these are actually built on top of each other. I mean, on the previous versions. So Servlet is is the traditional one, or the lower level type of program used to build websites. And again, most of these are just to build websites. Okay, dynamic websites. That's all. So the JSP is built on top of the Servlet. It has its own tags. Now some of the tags are becoming obsolete. Well, JSP is like, I mean, it's still there, but as you can see, it's becoming, I guess, less and less popular because of the JSF. Okay, and the JSF is now, it's also has a GUI component very similar to JSP. It has a very flexible model for rendering components. It also has, I mean, many other things involved here. But these are the three different technologies here. So you cannot build JSF without servlet. You still need the servlet as the main building block. Okay. As you look at this diagram here, this is the multi-tiered applications. Okay, so we have like the data tier, we have like the client tier, middle data, and so on. Okay, so if you look at this, you see that you have the client side. Okay, and then you have the web tier. We need this web tier to build websites. And this is where JSP and JSF live here in the web tier. And then you have the business tier. This is where your beans live, right? Your Java beans. Again, this is just classes that would do all the business logic. So your code goes in here. Okay. So this right here, the JSP pages, this is actually what we will call the view. This is what the actual pages, the websites that contain the GUI interface that the user sees and they interact with is with this page here. Your actual Java code is inside the business tier, which is your, we call it Java beans. And then if you have any data database, and you have the data tier, which is also known as the EIS tier, which is the enterprise information systems tier. Okay, so this is a four-tiered architecture, because we deal with the client, the web, business, and the data tier. Okay, and you can have, there could be more depending on what you put in there. Okay, so here is another just more information about each of those tiers: the client, the web, and then the server. I mean the business logic, and then the EIS tier. I just break it down to more information here. Okay, so let's go down to the platform here. It's kind of broken down to a different design. I just grabbed this from the Oracle site, so you can see where things are. Okay. The Java EE5, the version 5 here is a, of course you have your own, EE versions, you have your own, JSP versions, you have servlet versions, and you have your own JSF and so on. You have their own different components, but all of those depend on this Java EE interface or enterprise platform here. The version 5 became very important when because it allows us to use the annotation to put some short code into the program itself, so that we don't have to have a separate file to put some of those annotations. And I'll show what you mean later on when we see the annotations. Okay, so we have the web container. This is where we do most of our JSP, servlets, and JSF in here. And this is also where we would use like Tomcat and Glassfish and other container in here as well to communicate with the servlet or JSP or JSF, and also communicate with the database as well, right? Down here, different tier technologies. Again, it's just kind of basically explain what those are. The expression language, we talked about this last week. Okay, this is really important because what you'll be using in JSF now is a lot of this expression language, or EL. Whereas if you remember in the JSP, right? JSP, you can use both the expression language, which is the shortcut. You can also have like different language constructs, right? You have the scriptlets, the declaration, and of course the expression, right? And plus the expression language. So you have like 4 different sets of languages there. But in JSF, here you cannot use the like scriptlets and so on like you use in JSP anymore. Okay, you can only use the EL language inside JSF, plus your regular HTML and JavaScript tags. You can use all those in there, which is fine. But you cannot use any Java code inside there, and I'll tell you why in a minute here. So we have the Java Bean components here. This is just, again, your regular Java Bean classes, or the main object that is responsible for linking data from your web page to the database and so on, or from page to page, kind of like the session variables and so forth. Okay. So if you look at this again, kind of the same thing. It's just, again, showing you different technologies and the Java EE platform. There's a lot of them, right? If you look at this, so you have some of these are for desktop, meaning these are for console application or standalone applications over here. You'll use these for that, right? You use Swing class to build. Well, remember we do like the Java FX and early Java applications. You can use the Swing class to use like a little window, pop-up window, and so on. Okay, all those are only for desktop applications. Now on the web browser, you see that it has all of these here. Now we have the servlet, which is not included here, but servlet, you have the JSF, JSP, and this is a different one. So different technology as well. So you see that you have this layer up here. It's called the view. Okay, the view means, again, it's just the web page. Okay, every web page you see is a view. So later on we create a page. It's called a .xhtml file. That's a view. And then again inside here your controller. A controller is, again, is just where your actual Java code lives. So you see all the Java code you've written in the past will be very similar, except it's inside what's called a controller area. And then down here we have the model. Model basically just means data. Okay, where do you store your data? So you have three different components here, and then these are different type of services to connect to the database and so on, so forth. Okay, so let's go down a little bit further and look at this diagram. Now this is a very common diagram that you will probably see if you haven't seen already, and it will look similar to this one here. If you hear the term MVC, or if you Google for MVC, you will see this diagram. Not just, it doesn't apply only to Java, it applies to pretty much any language, or any language that uses this architecture here. But of course they don't call it servlet and JSP and Java Bean and so on. It would just say controller, view, and model. Okay, so here you have a browser. This is your view. Okay, this is the what the user interacts with, and what they see is actually a web page, right? Web page is the view. So if you look at this one here, this is the actual web page, and they will interact with the web page. When they do that, they're actually sending some type of request to the server, and what that does is now you will send a request to what's called a controller. Okay, so all it is that we usually have a web page or a document that's written, all the code are in the same place. So if you look at servlet, if you remember servlet, if you have the Java class all in one place, all the get, post, and all those methods are in the same area, or everything just a single file, and that was completely fine. But now what the MVC model is that you separate those three components into their own separate area, so that they would still talk to each other. Okay, except that you will not see any Java code in the view. Okay, so the view is, you can think of this as a template, just a template to design your website to look like. Okay, and then the data will be populated here through the model, which is the Java Bean object. Okay, the Java Bean is responsible for storing those data, and also getting the data from the database if you have them, or from the controller is also where your Java code lives. Okay, and then your actual Java code will be written inside the controller area. Okay, of course we don't call it controller or view or model, it's just the name they use, but really this is where your Java class live, right inside here. Okay, and then you have a separate page. This would be like the HTML file. Okay, you will have the JSF page will be this one here, and inside here you are not allowed to write any Java code. Okay, so you completely separate those code from the view, and all your data as well are separated. So now each of these are completely independent of each other, but they still interact, get data from each other through the Java Bean. So that's why it's really important to understand the Java Bean object and how it is used throughout your program. Okay, so if you look at this, you load your browser like I see now on the web page. I click a button on the view. Okay, that button usually associates with a link, right? A link or a web form is still going to go somewhere. It's either going to the same page or it goes to a separate page, right? So when you click the request button and it sends that data over to the server, then you need to send that link or that information to the controller. So the controller needs to decide where to send the data, right? Where to route the user to what page. So if you go to a different page, the controller will say, okay, you are requesting to go to a page 2 or go to a separate page. Then it will route that to a new view. Okay, so different page, different view. At the same time, if there's any data passed to that controller, then that data will be maintained by the Java Bean model object here. And then any data, if it needs to be updated, then it will also be done inside the controller as well. Controller, as you can see, look at these arrows here. It goes in these directions. That means that the controller can also have access to your view, and your view can also have access to your controller via this Java Bean. Okay, so they're kind of like all linked together in some way, but you just still have to separate your code completely from each other. Okay, so we have another term for this. It's called, I should probably put it here just for now, SOC. I might have it somewhere here. So it's called the separation of concerns. Okay, and you will hear this term a lot in MVC because you have like 3 things you have to concern about. For example, you have the object, the data, the business logic, and the template, which is the view. So you separate those out, and so that if you have a programmer who has no idea about Java, that person can still build this template, this website using just some syntax that you can provide to them, and they don't have to know what's happening inside the actual code. Okay, this is very true for AngularJS, which is a client-side language. But if you provide just the syntax, hey, to build a site uses, you can build a form using these tags here, these special tags, and they don't need to know what's going on inside here. So a person who has no background in Java can still build a website. Okay, so that is one of the strengths of MVC. Okay, so the model here again is the data, which is actually passed through the bean. So, and then we have the view. The view is also called a facelet. Again, those let terms, right? It's really just a HTML file. Okay, all or most of the JSF files, we have an extension of XHTML attached to it. Not your usual HTML, but it is the XHTML because it's using the XML tags, syntax. Okay, so those are your views, and then you have the controller. This is your actual business logic or the actual Java classes that you will write to program. So if you receive input, what do you do? If you want to process some information, what do you do? It's all happening in the controller area. Okay, all behind the scene there. So if you look at the life cycle, it will look something like this. So usually the first step is you receive a request from the browser. So here you have a button or something you click to log in or whatever that is. You would restore the view. The view means like that web page, right? It will display or render the view. Let's just say if you click login, it will load that login page, right? It will restore the view, put everything in place, render the page, and then if there's any request received, it will send that forward, and then it will process the request, And if there's any errors at all during that phase, then if you look at this arrow, it's going to jump all the way down to the end of that cycle. And if it's an error, then it will respond with an error on the screen. So it will not go through the whole process here. Okay, so assuming that is valid. So in other words, for example, if you click on the link and the link goes to a dead link that doesn't have a page existing there, that's an error. And when that happens, it's going to say, oh, no link found, no such link has existed, right? So you go out here. And if it does exist, then it will go to the next phase. It will process the validation, right? Again, it processes it, make sure it's validated. If there's any error, and again, it goes to the responder here. The render response here, actually, you're going back to the view again. Okay, this is the view down here, number 6. Number 1 is also at the view level, right? The user can see this. But all of these here are inside the code. You don't see this behind it because all these are internal processes. Okay, and then you go once the validation is processed, everything is legit. Then you go into update the model. I don't know, are there any data I need to update? If it does, if there are, then update those data. And if there are no errors, of course, then it will just continue on. Otherwise, it will just say, hey, that doesn't exist. There's no such as database and so forth. So, so things like that. And then if it does exist, and it will invoke the application, it will process it. It will maybe store the data or do whatever it needs to do here. And then finally, it will process the send all the information to the view again, wherever this view may be. It may be the same page, or it could be a different page completely, right? So it doesn't matter what that is. And in the end, you will have a render response. That means that the engine will actually render everything back to HTML and then throw that out to the screen so the user can see it. Okay, so this is the life cycle of JSF. It goes through this whole process. As you can see, it has many phases, right? It's about 6 major phases here. And then if you look at this again, what I showed you earlier, you have those 6 phases. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I didn't put the the internal steps, the process events here. But if you go through this again, you see that the first step and the last steps are actually what you see in the view. Okay, so this is where you see on the browser, on the main page. The other stuff are happening behind here in the controller. So when you process data, usually that's inside your actual Java code. And then from there, you also have access to your data, the model, which is any data you need to load from database or in RAM, right? Okay. And then down here, anyway, any questions on how the flow of data and this diagram, this model, are we okay here? I know it's kind of easy to, you look at it, it makes sense, but I guess the other way is how do you actually see this in code? So we can actually map these two together, and we'll do that at a few examples to see how that works. But I also want to talk about something called the immediate versus the deferred evaluation syntax, or the EL language. Okay, and so if you remember, like last week, I talked about just briefly about the expression here with the $sign, right? This is used for mainly in JSP. So some shortcut ways of how you can actually output data to the web page. Okay, instead of saying the percent, instead of saying something like this, right? 2 plus 3, right? Instead of doing that, you could just, or I mean, of course, it's harder than that, but you could just do like 3 plus 3, and you can get the same result. Okay, so it's shorter. You can do the same thing with this expression here. This is immediate. This is the deferred, just meaning this $sign and this $sign. Okay, and the immediate means as you see the expression, it will run it and it will execute right away. It will process it, and whatever data is there, it will display it, right? The defer is usually used in JSF, usually because defer means is to kind of delay until a certain phase, and it will process it, and that is because of these many steps it needs to go through. Okay, So if you receive some data here, and if you try to display some data right away or load some data, if you don't wait until you add a certain phase down here first, your data might be empty, right? Because I receive the data, I process it, it's not there, and you pass the empty data to the next page, and it doesn't work. So that's why JSF used the deferred language, just in case that it will load that data in the same at the correct phase. So it might be loading here or down here, depending on the process. Okay. So you'll see that most of the JSF syntax will be using deferred expression here. And the difference, another difference between the two is that the R value and the L value expression. Have you heard of that term before? Those two terms, the R value, L value. This is just some computer science terms, but I put it down here as well. The R value, it just means like your variables cannot be on the left side of the equal sign. Okay, the right value. R means is on the right side, L is on the left side, but L can also be on the right side, right? What that means is like if you think of a constant, it's a constant variable called E2. You assign that to the word Java. Now that's constant. You cannot change that value anymore, right? Nor can you assign it to a new value. You can't. So that's why it's called the R value. It's on the right side of the equal sign. Therefore, you cannot change its data. Okay? You can only output it or use it. L value is usually on the left side of the equal sign. That means you can change its data. Not only that, you can also use that as a value to be assigned to another L value type, right? So that is the difference between the L value and R value. And when you see these two expressions here, okay, the dollar sign is an R value only. That means you cannot set any values in here. Cannot be set. You can only output it to the screen. If you use this one here, that means your expression here can be modified as well as displayed to the screen. Okay, this is another very important concept in the ModelViewController. The reason is because, back to this diagram here again, okay, and here, because your data, as you can see, you can have a being available in the view, and you can display data from the model to the screen here. We can also receive input here and then change the bean's value, right? So therefore you can go both ways, okay? Whereas in the other way you can't. You can only display the data to the screen, so you cannot use the R value, okay? So that's one of the main reasons why. So here's just some examples of what they mean and how to use them. Okay, here the dollar sign versus the pound sign. But inside here is pretty much kind of the same thing. You can call the bean or session, and then the cart class object, and then the total, which is a property, and the same thing here. And here are some operators you can also use in the expressions. You can use any of these mathematical operations here, the logical operation, rational, and then you have some of these precedents here as well. And these are some of the reserved words. You can also use these words inside your expression. You can say, for example, if A not equal to B, right? You can also less than or equal to, or is true, or is empty, and so on. These are some keywords. And I put here some examples of those expressions. You can also Google this, and you can find a lot more, but this is example here. So for example, I could compare, is 1 greater than 4 divided by 2, right? If it's, so your result to the true or false, you get the result here, okay? So you can see how you can use all the expressions in here. You can use the greater than sign, or you can use the, you know, GE or greater than sign, or things like that, right? So either way. Here I'm using the dollar sign. You can also use the pound sign. Either one is fine, just for expressions. Okay. So here is a 10 times 10 is not equal to 100, right? That's what it means. This is hip is greater than hit, right? And so forth. The mod 10 mod 4 is 4 divisible by 10. If it is, then whatever that is, right? And so on. So you can see that you can use a lot of these in your code as well. Okay. So now to the JSF page, you have some elements that you can use in your page. We're not going to use a lot of these, the view and the form here. You'll be using mostly the tags, the H and the F tags. Okay. JSF is really, I mean, we're just going to probably just, you know, scrape the surface in this section here, because it's a lot to learn. There's so much about JSF that you can actually turn it into maybe a 2-course class because of the nature of this class. It's like PHP or ASP.NET. Okay, that's a lot. So we'll use mostly the H and the tag, the H and the F tag to do our coding. Again, the documentation, don't forget to go here. And then just another word, again, a managed bean. Okay, well, last time we talked about Java bean. This time they use the term called managed bean. Okay, because the bean's being managed by Java, you know, the program. So again, applies to the MVC controller. If you hear the term managed bean, it usually refers to JSF application. Okay, it's nothing more than the Java bean we learned last time. It's the same thing. They just call it managed bean. There's another term called backing bean as well, but so many kinds of beans here. So the Java bean, or we call it managed bean in this case, is follow the same rule as last time. If you remember, we would create Java bean class. It's just a public class of Java with no argument constructor. You have to have one constructor with no argument in it. And then if you have unique properties, you can. You could also define them, but you also want to use the getter and setter for those, like public, setter and getter, same thing, and so forth, right? Same thing. So here's an example. Another one here is by default. Okay, the name of the bean is the class name with the first letter in lowercase. If you don't supply the name of the bean, if you don't do it, then Java will automatically assign one for you using the class name, because the class names are unique. Right, you cannot have the same class in your program. So since it is unique, then the bean will be created automatically. So in this case, if I have a class called student, then the bean will be called student with the lowercase s. Okay, if it's called my first class, then usually the lowercase is m, and then the rest will be just follow the same as the rest of that. Okay. Again, by convention, your classes should always be capitalized using the Pascal casing. Okay, uppercase every character of every word in your class name, and then the bean is just that, lowercase the first character by convention, and this is the default. If you don't want to use that, sometimes, like for example, this is too long, you can change it, and so you can have it so that you can use a different bean name, like we did last time. We have like the JSP colon and the use bean, and give it ID of whatever the ID is, right? Same thing here. Except you use it by using what's called an annotation. Okay, it's right above your class. You have a class called student class. Okay, if you leave this line out, this managed bean with the @ symbol in front, and then inside that paren you have a name attribute with the value of student bean. This is the name of the bean, the object that you can use to access the student class here. That's all it is. Okay, usually you would say student. You know, then S is equal to new student, right? And this way, you will use the managed bean, which is student bean here, assigned to student. So this one here, if you're writing the code, will be just the same thing as a student right? Just like that. If you do write in the actual code, same thing. This object here is the class. It's an instance of the student class. That's all it is. But in JSF, we call it the managed bean, and then you give it a name. Okay, this name here now is associated with the student class. Okay, whereas here you can use student, or you want to call the same thing, you just call it student, and that's fine too. Okay, so it's optional. This one here is probably more meaningful if you want to rename, because my first class could be too long to reference, so you want to use MVC or something much shorter to manage. So everywhere else in your code, you can use the MVC dot something to access all the properties in that class. Okay, so that's the managed bean, and the name of the beans. If you don't supply it, you'll have, just remember this default. The default name of the bean is the lowercase or the first letter followed by the rest of the name of your class. Okay, component tags. So remember I mentioned that you have the H tag and then the F tag. Okay, component here, when you see the word component, is really a control, right, in your form. Or in other words, just your regular HTML tags. It's gonna, you can use the H tag to render all your HTML tags. But of course, if you have this, then that means that it's using the Java Server Faces tags because it will actually add some additional information to it, so you don't have to add those manually. So usually, if you create a a paragraph tag, you give it ID and so on, right? So in this case, if you just use like H and then, for example, whatever that tag name is, it will populate all those default values for you by default, so you don't have to do it yourself. Okay. So if you have a H column, this is, if you render that, then what you get is actually a table column in your HTML tag. Okay, so this would be like TD, right? A TD tag. Command button. This is a submit or reset or image type of button, depending on the context of what you put there. So, but usually this is always be rendered to a button type, a submit button or reset. You have a command link. I'll just show you some of these common ones. So this is common. You'll use this a lot. The command link is just a hyperlink. There's another one called hlink, which is also a hyperlink. The difference is that the command link, if you see the word command link here, you usually have to nest it inside a form. Okay, whereas if you just put h:link, that's just a regular anchor tag that you'd have to put inside a form. That's the difference. And there's another subtle difference between that as well. The command link here, if you use this inside your form, then it does not change the URL. Whereas if you link, then it will actually change the URL and loads that inside the URL as well. And so there's some advantages to the command link because it's going to hide your URL. You don't see it, but the data actually changes on the view. Okay, so that's that. Table is just your table. Form, just your regular HTML form. Again, if you just do H form here, it will populate additional information for you as well. It adds the ID, it gives you a default ID. It gives you the method will be like a default to post. You cannot have a get form using JSF. If you want to use a get form for the method type, you have to do that using just regular HTML tags. Okay, and then you also have like the action set to the default, which is the current page. So those are already pre-populated for you. You don't have to do that, right? So that's why you have a shortcut to do that, and it's really handy. Makes you code much faster using this way. Okay. If you want to create an image, you use the grab image tag. Same thing with the image tag, right? You can, so in other words, you can use either way you want inside JSF. Okay, you can use the custom tags here, or just use all plain HTML tags. Either way. And the input hidden is just in the hidden type of input. Notice you have to do that. You type all this in here versus just input hidden, and you're done with that tag. Okay. Secret is for password. And input tags is a common one. You'll use this a lot as well. This is your usual input tags. Tags for like to enter data. Okay, your text field. This is the one. This is for a text area. A message is just usually we use a span tag to output any messages like error messages or any of those stuff to the user. Okay, output form is just really just rendering any plain text to your screen. Okay, so like if you just put some text there, put output form. And the reason why, so you might ask, why can't you just put text there? You can. You don't have to use this tag. And the reason why you use this is because you can use other attributes in here so that you can control in your program. So maybe like you can give an ID as well, and then you can also do some additional function with these tags. Whereas if you just play the plain text, there's nothing you can do. Just whatever you type is visible on the screen. But here you can still control it. Okay. Label here is just the label tag. Output length is another encode. This is the encode tag, the A element. Okay, usually that's for like the encode tag. It's kind of obsolete, this one here. And then you have the output text, kind of similar to the output format here. Okay, the format here is the difference between this and the output text is that this one you can format, meaning you can pass some parameters to it. We'll see if I have time to show you some examples of that. This is just plain text. Okay, a table is, you can also use this as well to panel grid and so on. So some of these are there's a lot here. I'm not sure this is a complete list or not. You can you look at the documentation and see. But if you want to use like the drop down box, okay, select mini menu. That means you can use a combo box, a scrollable combo box, or a drop down box. This means you can select multiple items. That's what it means. Versus select one menu, you can only select one item. Okay, so you can use one or the other to generate that type of box. The radio buttons, okay, and so on. So you can see input tags here, same thing, the standard text field, and then these tags here has some attributes in here as well. Okay, so for example, if you to put like, for example, say h input text, and you can give it ID, you know, ID, and you can also use some of these here, right? Is it required? If it's so, you put required, and then you close that, something like that, right? So you have some attributes you can add inside the input tag. Okay. And there are many. You can validate as well. So here's an example of the input tag. So I have the input text, say input box with the ID of name, has a label called customer name. You format it so that it has a size of 30. Okay, the actual value is coming from a Java bean or managed bean called cashier, and then it will get the data from the property called name, right? So there's a field inside the class called name, which I'm hoping this is a string of type name, and it will be populated here inside the value, whatever that is. And you make this field a required, okay? And the required message would be like, if it's, so you put the message there, so it will show on the screen that this field is required or something. And this is for something else, but and so on. So this is a typical input tag. Of course, you don't have to put all these in here. You could just put like input here, ID, and then just the value. Probably those three very common. Okay. The output tag, you have different 4 outputs here: either format, label, length, and the text. Output is just basically display to the screen. That means they don't read any input, right? So you shouldn't put any input being data in here. So just output to the screen. So here's an example of the output label. Label for the fan club. Fan club would be like another, you know, could be an input. If you remember how to use label in your HTML, or do we forget those already? You can also review. Okay. You bind that to a special offer text. It just kind of show you what that text is going to be like, and then output text is, and so on. We'll do some examples later on here. There's another one, output link. The value is called Java docs, so that it will put some a link here. So if you click on this link, then it's gonna call and then output to, well, actually, just output the link to the web page. This one is for format. So as you can see, you could output a message to your screen. For example, let's say if there's a parameter or in your class called name has a value of Bill, and then you want to output that to the screen, just a text saying hello Bill, right? Then you can say output format, the value is hello, the text here, plus the placeholder 0 here inside the pair of curly, and then this place is going to be a parameter. We use the F. Okay, this is a Java JSF core tag. Usually you use that to put like parameters or other values in here to pass along to the parent tag, which is in this case it's 0 for 1. If you remember the prepare statement and the SQL statements, same idea. Or the printf, the print format in PHP or Java, same idea. So if I put like hello there, if I put another one here, it will be 1 and 2 and so on. Okay, if I do that, that means I have to have 3 of those parameters here to match them. Okay, so it will look like that. So that now 1 could be that, could be like age, and it could be maybe ID. Okay, and then output that would be like Bill, maybe like 35, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Okay, just placeholder, and then you should supply each of those parameters with value in this order. Okay, if you swap it around, you have it in the wrong place, and it may not be correctly. So again, you will see this code here inside a JSF page. As you can see, there's no Java code, right? Just a lot of it's like in XML, HTML tags only, plus the expression language. And another one here, you can see I kind of showed that already. The 0 here goes to this parameter, and then the second parameter here is this number, another number here. So it will look something like you are visitor number 10 to this page. Okay. Again, only for formatting. This is what you see on the view, the web page. Okay. Some other common tag attributes. Again, the word attributes here, right? It means it will go inside the tag here. So this is the tag. Attribute will be like value, right? Again, this is a tag, the attribute value, and so on. So that means these can also go inside those. You have the ID, you can give it ID, you can give it a style for style sheet, okay, CSS style sheet. You can also apply the actual style there as well, and a class name. You get a class. So if you say this one here will render to, so if we were to render that page, it will look something like table, right? ID is items, and then class is list background. Okay, it will look like that. So this list class style is going to be listed like this here. So now you can style it with your CSS style sheet. Okay, so and then display components of selecting one value. So this is just some examples how you can do different types of these displays on the screen here. I'm not going to go into detail here. Some examples in the book as well as other places. Checkbox will be one of these. Drop down here. I want to go into. Okay, so I think those are pretty much, some of those common tags you can use in your JSF. But before we go on a break, this is how you will create your Java server Faces project. It will be very similar to the servlet, okay, to the JSP. You're still going to build a dynamic web project, because it is a dynamic web project. Once you do that, then you need to install a JSF 2.2.x library if you don't have already. We'll do that tonight together. Just make sure you have that installed. If you already have it, that's great, and we'll check if you do have it or you don't. But if you don't, you can always go to this link here. Okay, click on this link, and this will take you to this version 2.2.8, and the one you want to download is this jar file. Okay, you click that install, and you will do the same as you did before. You're going to go import from the build path and then add it to your file. I'll show you how to do that one in a bit here. So this is where you go, or you can do option 2 is you can just follow these steps here, and we'll do together, so you can see if you can have this working, and then we can go on a break. And when we come back from break, then we can go right ahead and start adding some stuff to our code. Okay, so let's create our first project, and I will also want to make sure that you have this JSF 2.2 installed.